Welcome to Voices of the Valley, a captivating podcast series that brings together some of the brightest minds in the agriculture industry. Straight from the field to your living room, we explore the challenges, innovation, and triumphs in modern-day farming and provide insight for consumers who are curious about where their food comes from.
I'm Michelle Rivera with Western Growers.
And I'm Jason Resnick with Western Growers.
I'm so excited to have you as our guest, Jason. So welcome.
Really happy to be here.
I think the timing is perfect to have you on. We have a new administration in place. There's lots of new and evolving policies, one of which is immigration, a huge topic of interest across the board, and also something that deeply affects essential workers responsible for growing our food supply. And that's why programs like H-2A are so critical not only to agriculture, but for everyone. So talk to us about the H-2A program and what it is and why it's so important.
Well, the H-2A program is a topic that's close to home for many of our members. It touches everything from workforce planning to compliance, harvest scheduling, and ultimately the health of our domestic food supply. At Western Growers, we support members in navigating this complex process every day through our H-2A services team. And I'm looking forward to walking through how the program works, the challenges our members face, and how we're helping members stay productive and compliant in a really demanding labor environment.
For sure. Now, how does the process work for growers needing to bring in workers under H-2A?
Well, the H-2A program, we'll go to basics at first, for those who don't really know, is the federal guest worker visa program that allows U.S. agricultural employers to bring in foreign workers to perform seasonal or temporary work when there is not enough domestic workers available. It's the only pathway for temporary foreign labor in agriculture today. So sometimes people ask me, why is it called H-2A? What does H-2A stand for? And very simply, it's the section of the U.S. immigration law that authorizes it. So the H refers to the non-immigrant visa classification for temporary visa workers, and the 2 indicates it's a temporary or seasonal work visa as opposed to a permanent employment-based visa like the H-1B program for specialty occupations. And the A distinguishes it as a visa specifically for agricultural workers. So H-2A simply means a temporary agricultural worker visa under the broader H-2A category. So there's the H-2B program, for example, for non-agricultural temporary workers like those in hospitality, construction, and landscaping. H-2A is agricultural specific. So if you want to get really technical, it's the naming convention that comes right out of the Immigration and Nationality Act. So it's specifically Section 101, Subdivision A, Subdivision 15, Subdivision H, Subdivision 2, Subdivision A, H-2A.
Say that 10 times fast.
I can't. But you asked about the importance of the program, and really it can't be overstated. You know, agriculture is one of the most labor-intensive industries in the U.S., especially when it comes to specialty crops like fruits and vegetables. These are crops that can't be machine harvested easily. They require a lot of hand labor, often with a very narrow window of time to harvest those crops. So without access to a reliable workforce, growers risk losing crops in the field, missing shipping deadlines, and then ultimately downsizing operations. So H-2A is the only viable safety net for growers facing chronic labor shortages.
Great. And now I'm glad that you mentioned temporary or seasonal, because we did have a lot of questions from some of our listeners and some chatter on social media. The H-2A program isn't a path to citizenship. It's for temporary or seasonal work, correct?
Absolutely. It is a non-immigrant visa. So the individual who accepts that visa understands that they have no intention of transitioning to a permanent visa, permanent resident status. Although there was a recent change in the regulations that does not foreclose the opportunity of an H-2A worker to subsequently apply for a green card or a permanent resident card or seek citizenship. So the process is a multi-agency process that requires careful planning and precise timing. So first, the employer, which can be a grower or a farm labor contractor or a grower association, must apply for a temporary labor certification through the state workforce agency. So in California, that's EDD, the Employment Development Department, for example, and also the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Foreign Labor Certification. And this step involves proving that there are not enough U.S. workers that are available and willing to do the work, and that hiring foreign workers won't negatively impact local wages and working conditions. So after the job order and H-2A application is approved, the grower submits what's called a petition for non-immigrant visa to the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, or USCIS, under the Department of Homeland Security. And once USCIS approves the petition, the foreign workers apply for their H-2A visas at the U.S. consulate in their home country. Typically it's Mexico, but it doesn't have to be Mexico. There are countries in South America, Central America that are a significant source of H-2A workers. On the East Coast, many of the H-2A workers come from Jamaica, for example. And for some specialty jobs like mechanics, it's not uncommon for H-2A workers to come from South Africa. So that is the process. Once that visa is approved, that worker can legally travel to the U.S. and begin working. And that's not even the end of it. Growers must also comply with numerous requirements, including housing, transportation, meal provisions, wage rates, and record keeping, among others.
Yeah, and we'll definitely get into that a little later. It seems like it does involve a lot of coordination with growers, with the workers themselves. I can't even imagine the amount of paperwork that people have to do to make this possible and the cost of all of this involved. So it does seem like quite an extensive program.
It's quite an extensive program. There are a lot of steps, a lot of potential pitfalls, and any mistakes along the way in the application process can lead to delays. Delays lead to lost crops, lost shipping windows, etc. So what we do is try our best to make sure that our members get their workers on time every time, and that's something we take great pride in. But it is a very complex program, and the complexity doesn't end once the worker arrives in the U.S. There's a number of compliance steps as well, and we could talk about that.
Yeah, for sure. Now, what kind of jobs do H-2A workers typically perform on farms?
Well, the most common perception is that H-2A workers are involved primarily in field labor. So think of planting, weeding, thinning, harvesting, pruning. Their roles actually go much deeper than that. We're seeing H-2A workers filling more skilled labor positions, including tractor drivers, ag equipment operators, mechanics, truck drivers, for example. These are roles that require technical know-how and experience, especially on farms that rely on precision agriculture or operate large-scale equipment. Another role that's often overlooked is the shuttle driver or bus driver. So we're seeing more of those individuals being brought in on H-2A workers. They're responsible for transporting crews from the employer-provided housing to the fields and back again. Many operations, those workers also drive other workers to the grocery store or medical appointments and are responsible for ensuring that workers get the essential services that they need, since the housing is often located in rural areas far from town. So H-2A workers are far from just seasonal labor. They're skilled, they're dependable, and integral to a farm's operations, both in the field and behind the scenes.
It's just a perfect illustration of how there are so many different cogs in an entire machine that needs to operate efficiently.
True.
So what are some of the challenges that growers are facing when using the H-2A program? I know we just talked a little bit about all the logistics.
Great question. And really there are three main big ones: cost, compliance, and timing. So when we talk about cost is front and center. Employers must pay what we call the adverse effect wage rate, or the AEWR, sometimes referred to as the AWR, which varies by state but is often several dollars higher than the local minimum wage or prevailing wage. On top of that, employers must provide housing at no cost to the worker, cover transportation to and from the worker's home country, and provide daily meals or cooking facilities. And course, all of that adds up. The next one is compliance. It's another big challenge. The regulations are extensive and change frequently. Employers are responsible for detailed record keeping, housing inspections, transportation, safety, meal documentation, and more. And a simple oversight can result in a Department of Labor audit or penalty for noncompliance. And then there's timing. The entire process can take several months, and everything hinges on meeting tight deadlines. So if the paperwork is late or a consulate appointment is delayed, workers may not arrive on time, and that, of course, can be catastrophic for time-sensitive harvest. So that's why we launched Western Growers H-2A services almost 20 years ago, because one misstep in the process can result in delays, penalties, or even visa denials. So we help our members manage this from start to finish.
Now, what I'm wondering is, once a grower secures an H-2A worker, do they have to fill out paperwork again for another season when they come back, or are they, once they're in, they're in?
Every season requires a new H-2A application. So we start and restart the process every single season, and it doesn't matter if you were approved last year. Even the terms and conditions of your H-2A application that were approved last year may be subject to question this year. Your housing must be inspected every year. So if your housing passed the inspection last year, you're still going to have it inspected again this year, and new issues might come up that didn't come up in a previous season. And then the worker has to get the visa every year, and there are ways to extend the visa beyond the typical time, which is at most 10 months is the limit for how long a H-2A application can extend through. But a worker who's already in the country can extend or be transferred to another H-2A application that's been approved, or even to another employer who has an approved job order.
Got it. And now we know how this program benefits growers because of, labor shortages and the like. How does the program benefit the workers who participate?
Well, for many workers, the H-2A program offers life-changing opportunities. The wages they earn, which is in U.S. dollars, often exceed what they can earn in their home country, and the work is stable and structured. And they also benefit from strong legal protections under the program. The H-2A workers are entitled to specific wage rates, the free housing and that I talked about, that must meet federal and state standards, be provided daily transportation and safe working conditions. So they get strong legal protections, even stronger than what exists for domestic workers. And in many cases, they're treated better under the H-2A program than local informal workers because the employers must meet these federal standards. And we also see many workers returning to the same farms year after year. And that creates a positive cycle of trust. Workers feel safe and valued, and the growers benefit from experienced returning crews who already know the job and the operation.
Great. And now this is a question that I'm really excited for you to answer. Are there any misconceptions about H-2A that you'd like to clear up?
Yes, and there are a few big ones. And first is the idea that H-2A is, quote, taking jobs away, end quote, from Americans. The reality is, before using H-2A, growers must actively recruit U.S. workers and prove that none are available or willing to do the jobs. In most cases, the jobs go unfilled despite these efforts. Another misconception is that the program is exploitative. In fact, H-2A is one of the most highly regulated employment programs in the country. Employers are held to high standards for wages, housing, and working conditions. Many go well beyond the requirements to make sure their workers are respected and comfortable. So I think those are a couple of the big misconceptions.
Perfect. And now I do want to touch on that a little bit more. We have compliance and then we have these housing checks and such, but how do growers ensure that H-2A workers are treated fairly and have good working conditions?
Well, the employer is filling out affidavits, essentially, certifications under penalty of perjury that say that they are going to comply with all of the guarantees, assurances, and obligations of the program. And we've spoken about many of those: the wages, the free housing, the inbound and outbound transportation payments or reimbursements. So the employer is putting their name on the line that they're going to comply with those things. Virtually every H-2A employer is audited or investigated at some point as a matter of course. So they will have their records reviewed, their practices reviewed. The Department of Labor frequently speaks to the workers to find out what they're experiencing, if they've experienced any exploitation or any violations under the program. And the workers themselves are told their rights repeatedly. Before they come to the U.S., they're told their rights at the consulate. They're told their rights again. They're given a copy of their work contract. So unlike typical employment, which is at will, where you can hire and fire a worker for any reason or no reason at all, as long as it's not an illegal reason, an H-2A worker is here under a contract, and the employer has to comply with the terms of that contract or face significant penalties. And those penalties can be significant monetary penalties or even what's called debarment from the program. That means they are foreclosed from using the H-2A program ever again, and that could be the death sentence for some growers who wouldn't be able to operate but for the H-2A program.
And I think it also speaks volumes that we have a lot of the workers coming back to work with the same growers. I know you mentioned that a little bit earlier.
Yeah, I think that's the best evidence that the workers are being treated well and fairly. They have a choice to accept that contract or not. And workers who were not being treated well or fairly would vote with their feet. They have the opportunity to go to different employers under an H-2A contract or not come at all. So if the program were exploiting workers in the way that's sometimes portrayed by labor advocates, I would say we wouldn't see the workers coming back, especially to the same farms year after year. And then when we talk to those workers, and I've been to the farm and I've actually spoken to the workers who are there, often away from the prying ears of the ownership, about their experience, they talk about what a wonderful experience they have, and that for them, the opportunity to come here to feel valued, to earn significant income, and to be treated with dignity really is what assures me that, at least for our members, the H-2A workers who are working for them are treated well, fairly, and with dignity.
That's great. Can this program be improved? What kinds of changes would you like to see in the H-2A program over time?
Well, there are, I would say, three main improvements that come to mind. First is wage stability. The adverse effect wage rate, or the AWR that I mentioned earlier, has become unpredictable with double-digit increases in some states year over year. And that makes long-term budgeting and planning very difficult for growers. So we'd like to see more transparency and predictability in how the AWR is set. And then second, I would say processing efficiency. The application process is fragmented across multiple federal agencies, and it's common to run into delays, especially at USCIS or the consulates. So, for example, the Department of Labor several years ago went from a paper-based system to an electronic filing system. And they have a portal where agents like Western growers who file applications on behalf of our members, or those who do it directly, can go online and submit their own job order and H-2A application. It's a much more streamlined process than it used to be. Conversely, the petition process at USCIS is still paper-based, which means we're completing paper. It's, in many cases, quite a bit of paper, and sometimes we're shipping boxes and boxes of paper, especially when we're talking about transfer petitions, where we're transferring named workers from one petition to another. It may be 100 or a couple hundred workers, for example, where each worker, their identifying information, their visa history has to be set out, which means we're talking about voluminous packages of paper that have to be shipped now to Texas, what's called the Texas Service Center, which costs time preparing all of that paper, money to ship all of that paper, and then if USCIS has a question or something is not compliant, they'll send what's called a request for evidence via snail mail. It might take 2 weeks to get that letter from the USCIS saying we need clarification about this or there's some information missing. Whereas with the Department of Labor, if there's an issue or a question about the application, they'll send an email, and that email will say, we have a question about your job duties, please clarify. We respond with an email, and it gets cleared up within a day.
That's amazing. It's hard to imagine any kind of grower who could do this on their own without using services like Western Growers H-2A.
Well, some do it successfully, not many. Some try to do it on their own, and they can do it for a season or two, but then something invariably goes wrong. Like they didn't know, for example, and I just got this case where a member of ours who has been doing the H-2A program on their own for the last 3 years didn't know that the USCIS petition now requires a separate check for the asylum program fee, which is now $600 on top of every USCIS H-2A petition. So they didn't know they had to submit that fee, and after a week or two, they get their package back in the mail saying their package is not accepted because they didn't submit the correct fees. Of course, we follow every change that's happening in the program day by day. So when there's an issue or a change in the program, we're able to quickly pivot to address any change so that we're not engaged in any delays or causing any delays for our members because we're already ahead of the game. Unfortunately, even though we put out information to our members about what those changes are so that they're aware of them, they don't necessarily read our newsletter or our website, and so they get into trouble. So that's something we try to help them avoid. So that was the processing efficiency question, and then you asked, what else could we see in terms of improvement? I think the third big one is year-round access. So right now, H-2A is limited to seasonal work. I mentioned it's limited typically to 10 months, and that excludes operations like dairies, nurseries, greenhouse growers, or even growers in sunny climates. Lots of places in California could be and are year-round operations, but are foreclosed from using H-2A because they have a year-round need. So expanding the program or creating a companion visa for year-round work would provide critical relief for these operations.
Can you share a success story from a grower that benefited from the H-2A program? I'm sure you've got a lot.
There are so many stories. One that comes to mind is one of our members, an avocado grower in Southern California, had been struggling with labor shortages year after year. And they tried local hiring efforts. They raised wages, they offered bonuses, they tried everything, but still they came up short. So we helped them bring in a crew of H-2A workers for the first time, and the results were immediate. They met their harvest window, reduced turnover, and even saved on recruiting costs long term. And virtually all of those workers who came in on that H-2A visa program the first year have returned the next season and the season after that, bringing valuable experience and stability with them. So it really transformed their operation, and today H-2A is a core part of their workforce strategy.
Now, what would someone need to do to receive H-2A support from Western Growers?
Well, first and foremost, you must be a Western Growers member because Western Growers H-2A services is offered exclusively to Western Growers members as an exclusive benefit. Our H-2A services team that works hand in hand with our membership team, so if you're not already a member, it's pretty easy to transition into membership, and we help to streamline that application process in conjunction with the membership department. So once you're a member, or assuming you're a member already, you can reach out directly to our team. We'll do an intake interview to understand your operation, where you farm, what crops you grow, what kind of labor you need, and when you need it. From there, we manage everything from the job order to visa coordination, and we'll help ensure that your housing and transportation plans are compliant. And we'll also provide support throughout the season in case any issues come up. We provide full service support designed to take the guesswork out of H-2A.
And that's really interesting because they're not just another number when we're working with them. We really are giving them white glove service.
That's absolutely true. And like all of our services, we treat our members like family. They're part of the Western Growers family. We want to make sure they have a very positive experience. We also price our offerings in the H-2A services department to be as competitive as anyone else out there who's providing H-2A processing services so that the program is accessible to our members. We understand that it's not easy to farm or to provide labor under the current conditions with increased costs, increased regulation, increased competition throughout the world. So we try to make the program pencil out for our members, whether they're a small grower who needs a few H-2A workers or a large H-2A labor contractor who's bringing in literally thousands of workers or who has thousands of W-2s year after year, moving workers all over the state or multiple states in some cases.
Jason Resnick, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks for tuning in to Voices of the Valley, a Western Growers production, produced by Corey Lundy, Ann Donahue, Michelle Rivera, Kara Timmons, and Julia Nellis. As always, we'd like to give a special shout out to our guest for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe to catch our future episodes, and we invite you to follow us on social media to continue the conversation.